Today we're going to explore ethical decision making. The theories contained within this video can be found in more detail within Johnson's 2017 text, Meeting the Ethical Challenges of Leadership, 6th edition, London Sage. It's within the chapter Ethical Decision Making and Behaviour. Within the video I aim to cover the outline of Haight's theory of ethical decision making according to his social intuitionist model, and as Haight points out, there are some problems with our ethical decision making. I propose how Powers and Vogel's contribution to 6 components of moral action might solve some of the problems that Haight identified. So first of all, let's have a look at Haight's 2001 challenge to cognitive ethical decision making. Haight argues that we quickly make ethical determinations and then use logic after the fact to justify our choices. So what Haight's saying here is that we quickly and habitually make decisions with not paying much attention to the moral component, or at least not being aware of the moral component of the decision in front of us, and then after we've acted and committed to the decision, we then use a moral justification for this was the right thing to do. So what Haight's saying is we don't reason through things morally or ethically before we take action, but we actually do this after the event to justify the action that we've taken. So for example, when Haight asked Americans if eating the family dog for dinner was morally wrong, most people felt disgusted at this, but were at a loss to explain why they felt this way. Haight calls this problem moral dumbfounding. Basically, people had become encultured, or the culture in which they live said that it was wrong to eat the family pet. They don't know why it's wrong, but they just feel that there's something terribly wrong about that. And as a result of their culture and the norms in which they'd grown up in. Haight calls this approach to ethical decision making the social intuitionist model. We're using a sort of an intuition or gut feeling when we're making decisions and that have a moral component. To highlight the role that intuition and social norms play in moral determinations. So we make decisions with a moral component habitually, out of habit. Haight argues that these automatic processes are the elephant, and the logic or cognition or awareness, the self-awareness, is the rider. In most cases the elephant goes where it wants to go, though the rider can occasionally steer the elephant in a different direction. So there you've got a nice little metaphor to demonstrate the power of the intuition, gut feeling, social norms, habits play, and we have a small amount of cognition which we can become aware of the moral component of decisions and try to steer our decisions in a moral direction. Our instantaneous decisions about right and wrong are the product of social forces like our cultural background. For example, the Americans that were asked about eating the family pet. For example, dogs are routinely eaten in some societies. In these cultures, which don't treat pets as family members, respondents would approve of eating a dog for dinner. So that basically demonstrates the importance or influence of culture in making moral decisions. Haight does not completely eliminate reason from his model. Other people may challenge our intuitions, introducing new information to us and new arguments that change our initial position. So we are influenced by logic in the same way that the elephant can be influenced by the rider. Or we may modify our attitudes based on self-reflection. So we can increase our self-awareness about our own decision making. And that can be achieved in conversation with others or in conversation with ourselves through the process of self-reflection to develop and enhance our own self-awareness. Researchers in cognitive neuroscience or neuroethics are also challenging the notion that ethical decision making is devoid of emotion. And how they get to this conclusion is that participants were placed in MRI machines and presented with ethical dilemmas. The MRI machine then threw up in the scans that active brain cells require more oxygen than inactive ones, indicating which parts of the brain are in use when the volunteers are responding to moral and ethical problems. These neuroimaging studies reveal that ethical decision-making is not localized to one portion of the brain, but involves several different regions. What that indicates is that areas of the brain that are responsible for both cognition and emotion are active when we are making or trying to reason through ethical dilemmas and ethical decision-making and ethical thinking. Therefore, the dual process perspective is that ethical decision making includes both logic, cognition and emotion. And these are essential for making good ethical choices. So as we'll see in the classical theories of ethical decision making, we've tended to ignore the role that emotion plays in decision making. When faced with a moral dilemma, we need our emotions and intuitions as well as our cognitive abilities. A gut feeling may prompt us to re-examine our initial conclusion, for example, or reveal aspects of the situation that our reason ignored. How do things feel when we're trying to make a decision? We cannot make good ethical choices without employing our feelings. However, and this is a cautionary note, our intuitions and emotions can be wrong, and we should be prepared for that. Powers and Vogel from 1980 propose there are 6 components of moral action: moral imagination, moral identification and ordering, moral evaluation, tolerating moral disagreement and ambiguity, integration of managerial competence with moral competence, and also having a sense of moral obligation. What Powers and Vogel are serving by this nice little metaphor that I've put on the side, which is supposed to be a representation of Blackpool Rock, and if you've ever had Blackpool Rock, you'll know that when you take a bite of it, that the words "made in Blackpool" or "manufactured in Blackpool" or whatever other messages within the rock runs all the way through the stem of rock. I think this nicely captures Powers and Vogel's idea that moral decision making is integral to, or moral action, morality is integral to our behaviour and action and decision making. It's like the letters of morality, if you like, run all the way through the Blackpool Rock. It's not something that's just painted on one side. So it's integral. So let's talk through each one of those 6 components. Firstly, moral imagination requires the recognition that even routine choices and relationships have an ethical dimension. It's the Blackpool Rock idea. Everything at some level has an idea of right and wrong and the consequences of right and wrong. And one has to have a moral imagination in order to imagine those things and think things through. With that moral imagination, we then identify and order what the important moral issues are. What are the moral consequences of our potential action and behaviour? And in identifying those things, we're able to determine priorities and sort out the competing values and different options involving a moral component. Then, after we've analysed them, if you like, by identification and ordering, we then come to make a judgment, a moral evaluation, using our analytical skills in order to prioritise the options. Which is the most favoured moral option? We then move on to an acknowledgement of tolerating moral disagreement and ambiguity, in that often when we propose a course of action and the moral component, we'll often come into conflict with others who disagree with the morality, the ethics, or other reasons as to why we shouldn't fulfill that course of action. So we have to be mindful or self-aware that we're likely to come into conflict and disagreement, and to tolerate that and see it as part of the process. Fifthly, we need the ability to integrate our own managerial competence with a moral competence. This is the Blackpool Rock idea again, that we have to integrate our moral reasoning into our everyday decision making. This integration involves anticipating possible ethical dilemmas, leading others in ethical decision making, and making sure any decision that we make becomes part of the organisation's systems and procedures. Therefore, our whole policy and procedure, or mission, if you like, in our practice has to have the letters of morality running through the rock of our practice. A sense of moral obligation also serves as a motivating force in making moral judgments and implementing decisions. This means that people will often have a sense of duty as to what is right and wrong, and their reason for practicing and doing the work that they do with the people that they work with has a moral component. People do things because it is the right thing to do, and it's about acknowledging that moral obligation and building in a sense of moral obligation as running through the letters of running through the rock like the letters in Blackpool Rock. So moral obligation. Finally, like other types of decision making, ethical decision making involves both emotional and cognitive components. Classical theories of ethics have tended to ignore and discredit these emotional components. However, we'll see in more modern theories of ethics, such as Carol Gilligan's Ethics of Care, we are becoming more self-aware and more emotionally intelligent regarding the emotional components of ethical decision making, and the neuroscience also bears this out too. Emotionally intelligent leaders should be aware of the emotional influences, both the emotions that they are experiencing when they're trying to make ethical decisions, but also considering the emotional impact that their ethical decisions might have on others. Ethical reasoning and behaviour should not be something merely tagged on as an afterthought in our decision-making process, but as Powers and Vogel say, it should be like, well, they don't say this is my metaphor, they should operate like Blackpool Rock. In the morals and ethical components are integral to our decision making. If you'd like to understand these ideas in more detail than I've been able to cover in this short video, read the chapter on ethical decision making and behaviour in the Johnson 2017 text, Meeting the Ethical Challenges of Leadership.